Hello everyone, welcome to ICC's Game of the Day. I'm Joel Benjamin, and I have action from the 8th match game of the Anand Topalov match, and a very big game today. Possibly, we don't know how it's going to end up, but this could be a turning point in the match as Topalov was able to even the score at 4-4 in a game that had a very shocking finish to it. Looked like it was going to be a draw, and then suddenly Topalov won the game. But we'll get into all those details soon enough. So let's see how it happened. Well, it was another Slav defense. This was his third time that Anand defended with this opening after being blasted with the Grunfeld in the first game. And again, the D takes C4, a variation that can certainly be described as groveling from the black point of view, one that you would only play to make a draw. You could say only suitable for match play when you just want to avoid losing with the black pieces and play with white. And to this point, it's all the same as in the first two games that they played in this opening. Knight FT7. And now, interestingly enough, Anand varies from the other games. In fact, in the second and third games in the Slav, Anand varied both times, and it seems that he's very intent in this match to be the first one to vary, to be a moving target and not let Topalov have the same position twice, where he could use his tremendous analytical skills in the opening. But here, it certainly backfired because the move Rook C8 seems to be an unimprovement, because after Bishop B5, White has this unpleasant pin, which is actually going to force the Black King into the center a little bit prematurely. Now, previously to Rook C8, Anand had played A6 to prevent any white pieces from coming to B5, and that seemed to be a very useful move. With Rook to C8, Anand was able to obtain the bishop pair right away, and he might have felt that this could actually even give him some winning chances eventually in this line, but the loss of time seems substantial. And Topalov plays King E2. Of course, there's no need to castle in the endgame, and he wants to bring the H rook to D1 because the other rook has a nice open file on the C line. F6, Rook H D1. Now the Black King has to move off the D file, and the move King E8 is not the most desirable because the King is back where it started, but Black can't castle and still will need to connect the rooks. Alternatively, there's move King C7, which looks a little bit scary because the King is walking onto the C file and also might lose touch with the important D7 penetration square. During the game, Ronan Harsvi, my commentating partner today, came up with Bishop A7, and we found an amusing checkmate after Rook A8, Knight to B5 check, pawn takes, and then Rook C1, and the Black King is chimneyed. Bishop C5, Rook takes C5 is actually checkmate on the board. An interesting move, which we didn't mention because it's kind of counterintuitive, is King E7. Now that blocks the bishop and seems a little bit crazy. And after Rook C1, White is threatening Knight D5. But perhaps Black could play Rook to C6 with the idea of Bishop to E8, rerouting that bishop, and then try to fix the situation on the King side. But certainly not a natural way for Black to play. All right, so we had King E8. Now White can play Rook C1 is certainly a natural move, but A5 also makes sense, fixing those pawns, and we have again the same pawns fixed on light squares as fixed on the same color complex as the the bishop on g6, similar to the problems that Anand had in the first game that he played this system. And of course, White has a knight on the board to potentially exploit those problems. We analyzed bishop c5 for a while. Anand didn't play it, but it seems to be a dubious move because White can trade and then play rook c1. Black has very big problems connecting the rooks without allowing some major penetration of the white rooks. If rook takes a5, knight can simply move away, or b4, rook a3, knight b1. For instance, this position. If black could castle, it might be playable, but that move is not legal. The king has moved a few times, and so the rooks are about to come in with some amount of devastation. We also considered the move bishop b4 to take the knight and grovel actually somewhat along the lines of what happened in the game. But it seems that black probably doesn't need to be so desperate just yet. So bishop b7 was played. Bishop b6 now with designs on the d7 square. And rook f8, a surprising move that we hadn't really considered, but it's not obvious what black's idea is after rook c1, but eventually it became clear that rather than trying to connect the rooks, where there's no natural way to do it, Anand's plan instead was simply to push f5 and try to obtain counterplay on the king side. And if white captures on f5 or leaves the pawn on e4, black will definitely activate the bishop on g6 and the rook on f8 and improve his position. So the natural answer is pawn to e5, as Topalov played, trying to keep the position at least blocked in the center. After bishop g5, attacking the rook, Topalov retreated bishop e3, offering a trade. Now there's the move f4, which was somewhat controversial because it seemed to permit white a decided advantage. I think bishop takes e3 was the lesser evil. Probably Anand wasn't so pleased at the position after the exchange of bishops in an f4 check, because instead of retreating the king to, let's say, f2, allowing black to play rook c5 or rook f5, targeting the e5 pawn, I'm not sure which one is better offhand, white can play a very interesting move, king d4. It looks a bit suicidal, but white can follow up with knight e4, and the knight is ready to jump into d6 and block the d-file. Still, black can trade, getting rid of his problem bishop. And let's say g5 next move. Sure, white is better in this position, but is he better enough to win the game? I'm not at all sure. I think that this was definitely the way to go, and probably Anand regretted very much soon enough his decision to play f4, allowing tactical move knight e4, opening up a communication between these two rooks, and when black takes on c1, the knight jumps into d6 with a check. Well, black at least can move onto the d-file with impunity because white has to take time to recapture. And now king c6. Now, it gets very interesting here. On the air, we were looking at various possibilities that did not happen. Ronan had proposed to move b4, and we like this move with the idea of rook to d4, with two ideas, rook c4 check, and also g3, trying to win the d4 pawn, the f4 pawn. Well, as often, the computer can provide good suggestions, and I think that the move was probably rejected because Topalov did not want black to be able to reroute the bishop with bishop c2. We had rejected this because after rook d4, bishop b3, g3, white is winning a pawn, but probably white is winning a pawn under less favorable circumstances than he could have in the game. There's bishop e7, bishop takes f4. Of course, here with the pin, there's nothing that black can do to save the pawn. if pawn takes pawn, bishop takes g5, there's no way to promote the pawn because the rook can come behind. So bishop e7, and already black introduces possibilities of the bishops opposite colors ending. And then after bishop d5, I think that black has a defensible endgame. If f4, probably black is in position already to trade on d6 and go for the bishop's opposite colors endgame. His bishop on d5 is in a better position than in the game. Well, bishop d2 was played instead, and in this situation, bishop e7 has a little bit more impact because the bishop on d2 is blocking the rook, and there's no rook on d4 putting extra pressure on the f4 pawn. Here, I thought that white would play bishop to b4. I think that was a little bit more flexible than the rook c1 that Topalov played. One possibility is rook d8, and actually in the game it could transpose as well. Rook c1 check, king d7. Now the knight is temporarily pinned, but rook c4 guards the bishop, threatens to take both f4 and b7. Now if the bishop takes d6, one possibility is bishop takes d6, rook c8, takes, bishop f8. Now black is in danger of losing both of these pawns, because once the g-pawn goes, there won't really be any way to defend the f4 pawn. And after king c6, white might very well just go after this f4 pawn, and he could give the a5 pawn. I'm not sure if white should take on f4 directly or play king d2 to c3 first, but white will have a two-pawn majority on the king side, and very often having two passed pawns or a two-pawn majority on one side is sufficient to win. I don't know if black's counterplay on the queen side will mean that much. Just one pawn very often isn't enough to get it done. So this looked like a dangerous possibility for black. But after he played rook c1 check, I start to think that maybe it was a good idea, because after king d7, it looks like knight to c4 is a very interesting possibility for white. After knight c4, black has a few possibilities. One, he can kind of just go on a counterattack with rook f5. But I think that the invasion by white on the queen side looks pretty strong. Now white can simply defend e5. And black has some play on white's kingside pawns, but I don't think it's enough. It's one of those variations that if you put it on the computer, the longer you give it, the more it realizes it's not really a good way for black to play. So let's take back rook f5. Bishop c5 is a very interesting move here. In that case, and we considered that move b4, bishop d4, and then we thought bishop c3 would be an interesting move to exchange bishops. If the bishop moves away, white can try to penetrate on the d file. But of course, if black trades, the knight against the bishop is very, very big advantage in such a position. But instead of bishop c3, the computer was nice enough to point out to me that bishop takes f4 is actually possible. Rook takes f4, g3 chasing away the rook, and when the rook retreats, white can play rook to d1. If white can win a pawn in that fashion, getting this knight versus bishop ending, I think that black would be in very deep trouble. So the best move on knight c4 might actually be bishop d8. During the broadcast, we'd kind of rejected it because of bishop b4, but the rook simply moves away. It's not all that clear because after rook d1 check, king c6, white's pieces are a little bit vulnerable on c4, and b4 actually walk into a fork. So it's a little bit complicated. And if knight to d6, bishop e7, we actually kind of get back into positions similar to the game. But in any case, knight c4 certainly was a very worthy alternative. And beyond that, the move bishop to b4 looked very natural as well. And certainly bishop takes d6 is a possibility that actually transposes to one that we looked at. This position, black is definitely under some pressure. The threat here really is basically just rook c4, looking at this pawn at f4, and threatening to take the pawn on b7. Well, the move bishop c3 really completely surprised us. It just doesn't seem like c3 is a very active square. I guess Topalov was seeing that possibly the diagonal could open up with an exchange on d6, or maybe the bishop is just on a solid square, defending everything. Maybe he just wanted to force black into taking the knight and just play this bishop's opposite colors ending where he could squeeze his opponent. But still, the position after rook d1, it just doesn't look like that much, because bishop f5 just defends everything. And it seemed like Anand was well on his way to a draw. Now, Topalov made an excellent move here, h4, trying to artificially isolate the f4 pawn. And if black plays h6, and white can play h5. Nevertheless, I think that h6 was okay, or even rook to d8, or for that matter, king c7, almost any move. There's a good chance of getting the same type of ending that they had in the game, but perhaps black can avoid creating some weaknesses with the move g6 in the bishop ending that actually created some problems. So actually, from this point on in the endgame, there seemed to be many inaccuracies and mistakes from both sides, but it was an extremely complicated endgame, and I'm really not too sure about how anyone could be expected to play it without being able to move around pieces as we do in analysis. Okay, so now Topalov played bishop to d2, and Anand is willing to part with the f-pawn in order to trade rooks. And bishop's opposite color ending, the pair of rooks helps the advantageous side quite a bit. Here, white is an extra pawn and a pass pawn, but the pawn is blocked. The queen side doesn't offer very much. It's a question whether white can penetrate on the king side with his king and get something accomplished there. Now, here, bishop c2 may have been a more accurate way of affecting the plan that Anand goes for, rather than the immediate king d7. Because after king d7, Topalov missed a pretty good chance to win with king to d2, preventing the black bishop from getting to this a4, e8 diagonal so easily. And the reason why the bishop is good there is because that allows the black king to maneuver towards the king side. So after king to d2, if black goes with this plan of king e8, well, let's say king c3. We kind of looked at this line during the game, bishop b1, b3, king to d7. Okay, now if king f7, the black king is starting to stray. King d4, and if bishop c2, king c5, and suddenly that's kind of getting ready to sneak into c7, and that's the one thing that black must avoid at all costs, letting the king get to c7. But here, if white gets to take a b7 pawn, it's not winning the game right away, but white can always maneuver the king back to the other side, and now he's got 2 pawns plus his play on the king side, and that looks like it should certainly be enough to win. So in this position after b3, king to d7, king to d4, bishop to c2, king e5. Now we see the idea. Black is even willing to give up this b-pawn to prevent black from that maneuver, the bishop to a4, and force the king into f6. And this looked like it could certainly win for white in some variations that we looked at. Okay, once this pawn gets g4, that may very well force h5. If black waits any longer, g5 looks like it's probably going to be a winning move. And, well, black can't really deal with both the d-pawn and the business that's going on the king side. White is going to be able to make a passed pawn, and he will win with the 2 passed pawns. So going back to this position after g4, if black plays h5, king to g5. Now black trades pawns. Again, white has that passed pawn. Bishop e2 is possible. White can just take on h5. And he's winning with the passed h-pawn. Even in a position with, let's say, the king on f7, white will still win with those separated pawns. They're just too far apart for the king and bishop to deal with. But interesting point, though, is after king d2, we didn't actually discuss this in the game, but black has it's an interesting resource in e5. In a lot of variations, black is actually better off without this pawn. And after bishop takes e5, now here I think king e6 would run into g4, and the bishop kind of gets banished. But I think the king should step around, king c6, and king to d5, and this leads to drawish positions very similar to what may have happened later in the game. All these things are very hard to work out over the board, whether you should sacrifice an additional pawn to try to gain some in position, because if the sacrifice does not lead to maintaining a certain kind of blockade that you hope for, then you might end up with the same situation with one less pawn to work with. Okay, so Topalov played king e3 rather quickly. I think that he does have a tendency to make some moves quickly in the endgame when he perhaps should look around a little bit more. He's a little impulsive by nature. Bishop c2 now. Anand gets to the right plan. And this is still keeping an eye on the d-pawn, because if d7, king e7, white queens, this is insufficient for a white victory, because without the d-pawn, there's no danger for black beyond the king side, so the black king will just come into the area, and that should be enough to hold. So bishop e3, Topalov wants to put the bishop on a better square. It's not always so clear where that bishop should be, but one idea is to try to tie the king down by creating threats of advancing. Of course, the move bishop c5 prevents black from let's say, moving to a square like d3 or f1 because d7 would happen. But now after king f6, another very interesting possibility comes up. After bishop d4 check, there was much speculation about the defense e5. So you have check answered by check, just like in the movies. White, of course, takes the pawn, but now after king e6, black obtains an excellent square on e6, which not only is stopping the pawn, but also taking away a lot of penetration squares from white. After king e6, there's two basic possibilities. One, white can try to consolidate his extra pawn with king e4. But in this position, I don't think he has much of a chance to win. White still needs to penetrate on the king side somehow. There isn't anything on the queen side. Whenever white's king gets to b6, black's king can just go to d7. But if white is hoping to get in on the king side, the black king has actually a nice square on f5, which will make it very difficult for the king to get in. So I think that this would be sufficient for a draw. Now the other possibility after the pawn sacrifice, starting from here, is to play bishop to c3, giving up the pawn right away to try to penetrate with the king. But I think that black can hold here as well. Bishop f1, now the bishop is freed from any defense of the pawn. And after g3, bishop e2, f4, and now black can actually let a pawn go, because in this position white's pawns are very brittle, and black is able to blockade the three pawns with just the one of his own. White can't make any progress on the king side. He can't do anything on the queen side either. If the king ever comes over to c7, black just sits on the long diagonal with his bishop, and there's just the king and the pawn then would hold the king side by themselves. So it seems that after bishop d4, e5 was good enough to draw maybe more easily and actively than in the game, but still after king f7, it's probably still drawing for black. I see various ways that white can try to win, but I don't see one. h5 is the most immediate winning attempt, and Topalov goes for it, but various other ways seem insufficient as well. For instance, white can try to put this pawn forward to g5 before advancing h5, and the idea is that that pawn is now trying to get up there to be a future candidate to queen. Eventually white plays h5. It doesn't matter if the bishop is already on e8 because white could always tempo it away from there. Well, in this position, if black gets king f7, and it's a dead draw. So there's d7, king takes g6, and white is threatening to get the king in here, which could be a winning situation. But black has time to play bishop c6 and bishop to d5. And that holds everything. The king sits in front of the g-pawn. If the king comes around, black can actually just move the bishop about this diagonal. If it goes to c7, bishop can come to d5. There's just no way for white to make progress. So then h5 was played, and the star move is bishop to e8. And this strong move should have been enough to get a draw for Anand. Now, if he does not play, if he simply takes on h5, white will recapture and then bring the king back to h6. And as we see later, this position is a dead lost position for black. We won't go into it just now because basically this is how the game eventually ended. This line was suggested actually probably about an hour and a half before it actually happened, by Indian Grandmaster Hari Krishna, whose hand on IC is Tom Cruise, and he was kibitzing today. And once we became aware of the Hari Krishna variation, then it was clear to us how black needed to play to avoid it happening. But the move bishop e8 is strong because white is not going to easily get this position where he can exchange h for g-pawn and force black to maintain this passive formation. If white takes on g6, black will take with the pawn. And if d7, well, we've basically seen that position. That's the same as the last pawn on g5. And otherwise, king f7 is a complete fortress for black. Now, other moves don't really help. g4, g takes h5, g takes h5. This position is also a fortress. Black just moves the bishop. If white ever plays a king to g5, black can always play king to f7. There's just no way for white to make progress. So white has to tack about a bit. King g5, threatening to come into f6. Anand immediately prevents that. Okay, this is a zugzwang of sorts, but black actually doesn't mind taking on h5. King g7 is an excellent move. To make progress, white has to take his bishop off of that c5 square, and what this means is that now the black bishop is freer to take an active position. If the bishop moves off the diagonal of e8, a4, white will not have d7 queening the pawn. So the bishop blocked, bishop e5, and now a move like bishop to b5 right away was certainly sufficient for a draw. Anand played more indirectly with h4 and king g6, which is not necessarily a step in the right direction, but it doesn't hurt anything. The position is still a dead draw at this point. It's only now that Anand goes horribly wrong, and my only explanation is that we could say this move is a finger failure. That Anand understood what he needed to do to draw the game, and he decided that he had a whole host of moves to decide from, and that was maybe the biggest problem. He could play bishop to d3, he could play king to e8, he could play bishop to a4. All moves are good enough to draw. And my guess is that he had planned on something like bishop a4 to keep the bishop just waiting on the diagonal where it is, and that would be sufficient for a draw because king h6 could be met by bishop to c2. But instead he played bishop to c6. And after king h6, he was immediately lost. Before we get to that, let's see why this position should not be lost for black if he plays correctly. Let's start with bishop d3, one of many moves that are sufficient for black in this position. g4. Now I'm just going to put the king on d7. I don't know if that's strictly necessary. The only plan I really see for white is to play f5 here and make a passed f-pawn. Now, if white played king h6, if it were possible, white would have a great plan, let's say, to play f5, pawn takes pawn, and if he could only play g5 and bishop f4, everything would be great, but black would just play f4 himself and guard h7, again, with a complete fortress. So I think white has nothing better than f5. And now h6, I think, is a nice move. And after king f6, black just leaves the pawn on h6 for a bit. It's a kind of an awkward moment for white. He could play, let's say, bishop f4. And I think black can wait some more. King e5, threatening the h6 pawn. Now h5. And this pawn really presents some nice counterplay. Even if white stops the pawn where it is, whenever he moves his king to f6, black is going to play h4 and offer a trade. So it doesn't really matter if he stops the pawn or not. And this position just looks like a total draw to me. White comes back to g5. Black will sit on that pawn, and white could advance f6 at some point. But I don't see how white can win. One of the problems is that if he doesn't move the bishop away, that black will actually just be able to take the bishop, because even though white queens, black is also going to queen. In fact, in this situation, black would queen with an extra, get a check with an extra piece. So this position looks to me like it's pretty definitely going to be a draw. I don't know if black could do even better and prevent this plan for white, but it didn't seem sufficient to win in any case. Well, one indication that Anand understood that he had to play that way, and the way that he played in the game was hopeless, is the fact that after bishop c6, the game didn't last very long. Topalov played king h6. Again, the bishop can't get to the diagonal, so black has to defend with the king. And now after g4, we had a sudden resignation from Anand, and a lot of the spectators were confused. But this is actually the situation of the Hare Krishna variation. White has a winning procedure, and black cannot do anything about it. The black bishop cannot move off of this a4 e8 diagonal, so black is basically just having to go back and forth. So the game could continue: g4, bishop b5, g5, bishop to c6. I think probably useful to put that pawn on f4 just in case. And now the key move, bishop to g7, kind of stalemating that king, really covering the f8 square. That's the key. And then after bishop e8, white always has a reserve tempo move. Black has to abandon coverage of g6. And now this move wins very simply for white. Whatever black does, the king now has this avenue to come back and penetrate. White is ready to win with king e7, but also he can back up his bishop. He doesn't need to sacrifice the bishop, but he will force black to sacrifice his. So a very easy winning plan, very obvious winning plan, and it has to be said that just 2 moves after that fatal bishop c6 move, Anand resigned. So that indicates that he understood that he could not play into this position, but somehow his brain just blew up, under the stress and strain of a long game, world championship situation. I think he just forgot that the bishop on c6 does not have access to the b1 h7 diagonal. So after the move g4, Anand resigned, and with that, Topalov squares the match at 4-4. A lot of questions remain after this game. Will Anand try to grovel again with this opening next time he's black? After losing a game like this, it's psychologically difficult to play the same opening again. The last game with white, Vichy ran into some very good preparation from Topalov. Be very interesting to see, will Vichy do something else, or will he have some new ideas in the Catalan to play against Topalov? So 4-4 as we head into the home stretch, and we will, of course, continue to have live coverage and live commentary on ICC. So that wraps it up for me. Stay tuned for the Game of the Day trivia question. But for me, Joel Benjamin, as always, it's a pleasure. And thanks for joining me on ICC's Game of the Day.
Welcome back. back to another edition of Game of the Day Trivia here on ICC Chess FM. This is Mick Gringard of ChessNinja.com, bringing you another opportunity to win a one-year subscription to New in Chess magazine, the finest chess magazine in the world. Go ahead and check it out, and all their other fine wares. Go to newinchess.com in order to do that. But don't do it right now, because right now you have a trivia question to answer. And, well, actually, first you have an answer to listen to, and then you have a new trivia question to answer, because really, if you haven't already sent in the one from round 7, you're in trouble. So let's go ahead and give that answer, see if you were the lucky winner. Well, I actually don't know the answer to that myself, but I do know the answer to the question, so let's go ahead and toss that out for you. Other news tidbits as well. So the question was, Anand was the first world junior champion from Asia. Who was the first world junior champion from Africa? Perhaps you didn't even know there was one, because it didn't happen that long ago. It was Ahmed Adli of Egypt, and that was just in 2007. He won the legendary title of World Junior Champion. Still a very, very strong event. You might think this is completely passé, being as you have these players who are 20 years old battling for this title. Meanwhile, you have players like, of course, Magnus Carlsen and Karyakin and others who are already in the top 10 in the world, who obviously don't bother to show up and win World Junior titles, but still very, very strong event. A lot of grandmasters playing, still some prestige, still some good invitations come when you win that event. I mean, we've even seen some players who are already hitting world class going back and playing it. For example, Shakhriyar Mamedyarov has, I believe, won it twice. He was already doing very, very well there for the Azerbaijanis. So it still has some clout there, even though, again, it's not quite what it used to be when you had, the very, very best young players in the world who are eligible. Also, players are just younger now, and they haven't really kind of modernized it. I suppose if they were going to keep up with the times, they could just drop it to under 18 or under 16, but they already have those events separately, and it's also a nice little moneymaker for the hosts, so they like to give that one out, invite a lot of people to come and make a tidy little profit, I imagine. Alright, but enough about shenanigans. So the correct answer was Ahmed Adli. I didn't need to mention necessarily that he was from Egypt or that he won in 2007, but bonus points if you did. Anand, of course, won way back in 1987, long time ago, and took that title there. Since then you could go with Darman Sadvakasov, who won in 98. He's from Kazakhstan, of course, Central Asia, but Anand took it. That was a long, pretty good sized gap there. But Vichy winning it in 87. All right, let's go ahead and get right to that round 8 question without further delay. And this one here, going back into the history books once again for our World Championship theme. And it is, name 2 people who played more than one match for the World Championship, but yet never became world champion. Looking for 2 names here, and I'm not saying there are only 2 such people. I'm saying you only need to give 2 of their names. There might be 3, 4, or 5 of them, but we're looking for 2 who played more than one match for the World Championship but never became world champion. So these unlucky, tragic losers, those are the names we're looking for. Because really, I mean, to make it once, I mean, a few people ever make it at all to have a shot at the World Championship. These guys made it twice and yet got turned back. On the other hand, at least you have to say they got their fair shot. That's a little in a match. That's you can be sympathetic as you want toward guys like Bronstein, who made it to his match with Botvinnik and he was winning, and then at the very end he blundered in an endgame and lost, and the match was drawn, so Botvinnik kept his title. Bronstein never got another shot. So that is a tragic story, and yet he did have the shot there at the board. And unless you want to go for the conspiracy allegations that because of political influence, he knew that if he'd beaten Botvinnik, he would have spent the rest of his life teaching the Siberian Eskimos how to play chess or something, but no, let's not go there. All right, that's too confusing. If we start adding conspiracy theories to our trivia, we're really going to get into trouble. So let's go ahead. I want you to send those 2 names in your answer there to trivia@chessclub.com. Trivia@chessclub. I was going to say the Chukchuks, but the Chukchas. That's the regular joke, but that takes way too much explanation. But if you ever get a little bored and you feel like Googling around some odd Russian and Soviet humor, you can just Google the Chukcha jokes, and you'll see what I was talking about and why I started laughing and turned it into Eskimos, which doesn't make any sense, but at least doesn't require me to go on for 5 minutes more trying to explain what a Chukcha joke is. But all right, now I've just dropped that out there, and I'm still not going to explain it. So go ahead. All right, so looking for, just in case you've now forgotten, like I probably have, what the question was here for round 8. Name 2 people who played more than one match of the World Championship, but yet never became world champion. Looking for 2 names. Send them into trivia@chessclub.com. Include with your answer your full name, your ICC handle, and your mailing address, so we know where to send those copies of New in Chess magazine. All right, folks, we've got a few rounds left here. Hope you're stepping up your game. Good luck to you. Be back tomorrow with the round question for Game 9 of the Anand Topalov match, only right here on ICC Chess FM.